This has actually been a while coming. It was supposed to be delivered several months ago. To the point John didn't even call me this week and ask me what the subject was. He thought we were going to keep rolling right along with the introduction of glory to God and everything about God being the center. But what happened was, several months ago, I had 4 or 5 lessons planned back to back to back about some things the elders and I had talked about and we were trying to deal with in a moment of time. And I let the mail out for that month slip. It did not make it onto my sermon schedule, and I followed my sermon schedule. And so we're going to go back and talk about purity from several months ago. And we're going to do it starting in Exodus chapter 19. Maybe not where you would go to start this thought yourself, but watch what is going on. Exodus chapter 19, verse 9. The moment prior to God's arriving on that awesome mountain and Moses going to get the 10 Commandments. The Lord said to Moses, "Behold, I shall come to you in a thick cloud, in order that the people may hear when I speak with you, and may also believe in you forever." Then Moses told the words of the people to the Lord. The Lord also said to Moses, "Go to the people and consecrate them today and tomorrow, and let them wash their garments. Let them be ready for the 3rd day." We'll leave off right there for just a second. Moses, I need you to make sure that you purify them. I need you to make sure that they are holy and that they are separate, that they have been consecrated. Why? Why is that so important at this exact moment before the giving of the law? Because the rest of verse 11 says, "I am about to come into your presence. I am about to descend on this mountain, and my presence is going to be so overwhelming, they're not even allowed to touch the mountain, lest they die." So God is establishing a point early in His relationship with Israel. To be in His presence, one must be pure. One must be holy. One must be snow white, unstained. Why? What's the big deal? Well, the big deal is Habakkuk chapter 1 and verse 13, God's eyes are pure and He cannot approve evil or wickedness. So He cannot make His appearance on Mount Sinai to give this law if they're not ready for His presence. He shows up, they're not consecrated, they're not snow white, they're not pure, they're going to die. Make that connection that we often make to Isaiah chapter 6 and understand that's exactly what's going on here. Preparation for them to be allowed in the presence of God. That, the fact that God is pure, the fact that we have to be pure to be in His presence, that is why Jesus, in the reading this morning, reserves the blessing of seeing God for the pure of heart. Those who are not stained by the defilements of this world. To help us get this, God had His writers from Moses to John, from beginning to end. God had His writers weave a theme of purity through the entire book, where he constantly goes back and talks to us about consecration, holiness, purity, being washed white as snow. He brings up baptism. He brings up washing, purity laws under the Old Testament, the washing of hands and the washing of clothes and etc. are symbols of what he has to do with our lives to be before him. Let's read a few of those. Psalm 73 and verse 1. Surely God is good to Israel. And then within that category of Israel, to those who are pure in heart. To those who are governing what is coming into and coming out of their spiritual lives. Proverbs chapter 20, verse 11. It is by his deeds that a lad distinguishes himself, if his conduct is pure and right. And so we set ourselves apart by purity, by keeping ourselves unmarked by the wickedness around us. 2 Corinthians chapter 6. Paul starts the chapter with an emphasis in verse 1. Working together with him, we urge you, we beg you, do not receive the grace of God in vain. Do not misuse, do not take for granted what is being done for you. And then he writes down a little farther, he talks about the day of salvation, and he says one of the ways that we guarantee that God's grace in our lives is not in vain, in verse 6, is through purity. It's through a life that is holy and acceptable to him. One that he can look on with pure eyes. 1 Timothy chapter 4 and verse 12. Do not neglect the spiritual gift. Excuse me, I jumped down a verse. Let no one look down on your youthfulness. Rather in speech, conduct, love, faith, and purity, show yourself an example to those who believe. Timothy, conduct your life in such a way that when they look at you, there's no stain in your life. There's no stain on your soul. And in 2 Timothy chapter 2, verse 22, flee youthful lust, pursue righteousness, faith, peace with those who call on the Lord from a pure heart. So fleeing some things for the purpose of keeping the heart pure. That's just some of the ones in the middle. I said the theme started where? I said it started in the beginning, right? And runs all the way through to the end of the book. Genesis chapter 3. And what you'll notice now as we get to Genesis 3 is we're talking about a specific kind of purity this morning. Genesis chapter 3, God has finished creation. Then we get the details of Man and woman in chapter 2, we get the establishment of the union or the covenant or marriage in chapter 2. And then chapter 3 opens and we're introduced to the serpent. We're introduced to temptation. We're introduced to the twisting of God's words to intentionally mislead us. And Adam and Eve eat of the tree of the knowledge of good and evil. And they immediately do what? With this newfound knowledge of good and evil, what's the first thing they do? They make themselves clothes. Clothes in quotation marks, because we'll see what happens in just a second. They make themselves intimate part coverings, loincloths. So basically, Eve has a bikini and Adam has a bathing suit. And they're dressed. Right? Well, God comes into the garden and God invites them into His presence. In one of the saddest commentaries on mankind, because of a lack of purity, Adam and Eve hide from God. Hey, where are you guys? I'm here to visit with you. Oh, God, we're hiding. Well, why are you hiding? Well, because we're naked. No, we just said they made clothes and that they were dressed. Adam and Eve still recognize that they're not pure in the way that they are dressed before God. They still feel that they are naked. And God agrees. As this conversation goes on and it gets to the end of it, God's going to basically, to paraphrase, say, get dressed. And I'm going to dress you. I'm going to provide the wardrobe that is acceptable for you. Now, why are they worried about this? Well, they're worried about it because before the tree, before they ate, nakedness was innocent. They were naked and unashamed. There was no fear, there was no worry. But once innocence is removed, their nakedness, their nudity was no longer innocent. They realized they were no longer pure. They were no longer able to stand before God dressed the way that they were. And God agrees. That no longer are we going to have that innocence that we had in the garden. Let me ask you another question. Why? Why can we not keep the innocence that we had in a garden? Why can we not keep the innocence of an infant or a 1-year-old or a 2-year-old that jumps out of the bathtub and streaks through the house and never thinks another thing about it, and nor does anybody else? Because once innocence is lost, nudity stimulates all three of Satan's weapons. It's one of the sins that keys on all three: the lust of the flesh, the lust of the eyes, and the pride of life. Some things that Satan tempts us with only key on one or two of those. Is it a serious issue? God obviously thinks it's a serious issue when we're still, in a sense, kind of innocent. In Genesis 3. Because He goes ahead and addresses it. So is it a serious issue? Yeah. David is called what? David is a man after God's own heart. David is, by our standard, a good guy. David is a guy who meditates on the law of God day and night, and yet when confronted with nudity, he sees it, he likes it, and the pride of life, he acts on it. It's a serious issue. So, God is establishing two principles as Adam and Eve leave the garden. He is establishing, number one, do not expose it. Cover it up. And then he is establishing, number two, do not go looking to see it outside of the union of marriage. When Adam and Eve leave the garden, where they're the only ones there, God shows them that it's inappropriate to be dressed in such a way on the other side of that gate that others are going to look at you, and it's inappropriate to look. I also said this theme continues into the end. Revelation 21 and verse 8, the immoral will be left on the outside looking in. That reference to immorality in Revelation 21 is to any kind of impurity related to sexuality. Here's where we're heading. As a culture, are we good at following God's rules of visual purity? Saw a couple of heads. No, hardly. We are the most pornographic society in the history of the world. There was a time when I was a kid when it was under the counter, and if it was bought, it was delivered in a brown paper bag. And everybody knew what you were walking out the door with. Man, that's long gone. It's been in print for decades, but it is now readily available on every possible platform, even the mainstream. Was watching Virginia Tech and Miami men's basketball yesterday. And a timeout was called. And, gee, imagine the cameras found the cheerleaders. And they had on bikini tops for college athletics. Finished watching the game. Kim and I are eating. They announced that they're flipping to a gymnastics competition. So I never look up intentionally. And Kim made the point. What would you do if you had a daughter and she wanted to be a gymnast? And then she actually got my attention and made me look for 2 seconds. There was no seat in the bottom of this girl's gymnastics suit. Dude, I've had a wedgie. There's no way it's comfortable. But she said, look, that thing's gone. It had completely disappeared. Guess what? Years ago, Mary Lou Retton and them, I would watch gymnastics in the Olympics. I don't turn it on. I don't watch Olympic diving. We've made it mainstream. There is a reason God put so much emphasis on purity. Porn is the most dangerous plague in America. It ruins individual lives. It ruins families. It is a progressive sin. It is a gateway sin. And to battle it, what we have to do as Christians is remember that one of the keys to pure religion is what? Keep oneself unspotted from the world. We have to fortify ourselves. We have to build walls visually and mentally. Psalm 119 in verse 9, how can a young man keep his way pure? By keeping it according to the Word. Keeping it according to the standard that God established. What was the standard God established in Genesis 3? Keep it covered up and don't go looking for it outside of your marriage. So some warnings. Number one, it's no longer a man thing. The rise in female viewing of pornography has been exponential over the last decade and a half. It's rapidly approaching the same numbers as men. Number two, it's no longer an adult thing. The average child in the United States is exposed to pornography at the age of 12. Number three, it is addictive. And just like it gets us on all three planes of the lust of the flesh, the lust of the eyes, and the pride of life, it's addictive physically, it's addictive chemically, in the changes that it makes in the hormones in your body, and it is addictive psychologically. So let's go back to where we started. We have to be people who emphasize purity in everything that we do. In everything that we watch, everything that we listen to, everywhere that we go, everything that we say, everything that we think. And by doing that, we can begin to establish boundaries that will help us maintain the ability to blush. Because when we get to the point that we can no longer blush, the prophets say that's when we're in trouble. And God was disgusted with His people when they could no longer blush. Purity. We come before God to offer our worship. Are our hands pure? Are our minds pure? Are our hearts pure? Are our lives pure? If not, Habakkuk said he can't even look at us. If you violated God's purity laws in any way, and you've not been washed in the blood of the Lamb, the invitation this morning is open to be forgiven of all your past sin. Have it washed away. Start fresh. Whiter than snow. If you are a child of God and purity is an issue, please let somebody know. And please look for the help that you need as we stand and sing.